My son took all my possessions, but he didn't know that I would soon become a millionaire, and he would come crawling back. Every screw I tightened in my old workshop seemed to echo the sound of his betrayal. The smell of oil and metal was the only scent I had left, a constant reminder of what I had lost: my home, my savings, the dignity that an old man believes he has earned. Glauco, a craftsman who spent his entire life measuring the world in millimeters, was deceived by the person who should have protected me the most. He made me sign documents with the promise of a peaceful future, a place where I would be cared for. Instead, I received abandonment and this small space at the back of a building, a place forgotten by the sun and time. If you feel compelled by my story of betrayal and resilience, subscribe to the channel. Follow my story of overcoming adversity and discover how I turned pain into a driving force for my revenge. Lucas, my only son, was always in a hurry to live, to have, to be something he wasn't. He looked down on my work, calling my creations old man's toys. He didn't understand the beauty of a perfect mechanism, the patience needed to make gears dance in harmony. For him, value was what shone, what could be displayed, and it was with that sparkle in his eyes that he presented me with the papers. "It's to make things easier, Dad," he said, with that smile I used to love. "I'll manage everything for you, so you don't have to worry about anything." Tired and believing in the kindness of my own flesh and blood, I signed. A week later, I was here in this workshop, with a box of clothes and my worn-out tools. The walls of the workshop are witnesses to my new life. They saw me spend sleepless nights not out of despair, but out of concentration. Because while Lucas spent my money on expensive cars and apartments with stunning views, I was finishing the work of my life, a small device, no bigger than a matchbox, but with an internal mechanism so complex that it took 40 years to perfect. It was a high-precision gyroscopic stabilizer, something that would revolutionize drones, medical equipment, and much more. It was my secret, the final piece of a puzzle that no one, especially my son, knew I was putting together. The only soul who knows my plan is Raquel, a young apprentice who started helping me years ago, fascinated by my craft. When Lucas discarded me, she was the only one who continued to show up. She brought me hot coffee in the morning and listened to my silence. Her young eyes, filled with a loyalty I should have received from my son, gave me strength. One day I showed her the finished device. She didn't understand the mechanics, but she understood the spark in my eyes. "This is your freedom, isn't it, Mr. Glauco?" she asked with a wisdom that didn't belong to her age. I just smiled. It was more than freedom. It was the key to my justice. 3 weeks ago, a cutting-edge technology company bought the patent. The deal was made through a lawyer Raquel recommended to me, a discreet man named Victor. The amount they paid was absurd, a sum I could barely comprehend. The money was safe in an account Lucas would never dream existed. Now the hardest part of the plan began: the wait. I continued my routine at the workshop, acting like the defeated old craftsman everyone believed me to be. I ate my simple meals, repaired old watches to earn some change, and watched the city move outside, indifferent to my existence. My revenge isn't about the money. If it were, I would have already bought a bigger place, hired the best lawyers, and sued Lucas until he had nothing left. But that would be too quick, too easy. My goal is different. I want him to feel the weight of his choices. I want him to exhaust every penny he stole from me. I want him to realize that luxury is fleeting and that character is the only thing we truly possess. I know him. He doesn't know how to manage, only how to spend. His life of appearances has an expiration date and the clock is already ticking. Raquel sometimes looked at me with concern. "Aren't you afraid that all this resentment will hurt you?" she asked last week while cleaning one of my tools. I stopped what I was doing and looked at my hands, calloused from decades of honest work. "Raquel, this isn't resentment. It's the last lesson I can teach my son, a lesson about value. He needs to learn that what you build with your own hands is worth more than what you take from the hands of others." She said nothing more, but I saw in her eyes that she understood the depth of my pain and the cold logic of my waiting. The news began to trickle in through a distant cousin, my son's aunt, who still called me from time to time out of pity. First, it was about an expensive trip. Then, a business deal that went wrong. Recently, I heard that he had to sell one of his cars. Each piece of news was like a musical note in the symphony of his downfall. I listened to everything with frightening calm, thanked her for the call, and went back to my work. Patience, the virtue that allowed me to create perfect mechanisms, was now my greatest weapon. I could wait. I waited 40 years to perfect my invention. I could wait a few more months to see my plan come to fruition. This morning something changed in the air. The hum of the city sounded different, higher pitched. As I polished a small piece of brass, my old phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. The voice on the other end was hesitant, full of poorly disguised shame. It was Lucas. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He got straight to the point, talking about a temporary difficulty and an investment that didn't work out. He needed help. A small loan, to get back on his feet. I listened to every word, feeling ice form around my heart. The time had come. The clock I had been building in my mind for months was finally sounding the alarm. I let a long silence hang in the air, long enough for him to become uncomfortable. "Dad, are you there?" he asked, the arrogance in his voice replaced by a hint of desperation. I took a deep breath, looked around my workshop, my kingdom of dust and precision. "I have nothing to give you, Lucas," I said, my voice firm and clear. "You've already taken everything I had." I hung up before he could respond. I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of his crawl, and I would be here, waiting in my workshop, ready for the final act. After hanging up, the silence in the workshop seemed heavier, denser. The phone in my hand felt like a piece of ice. I didn't feel the explosion of joy I had imagined for so many months. I just felt the final click of a gear falling into place, the sound of a mechanism completing its cycle. My revenge wasn't hot and noisy. It was cold, silent, and precise, like the ticking of one of the watches I repaired. Justice, for me, was not a cry, but the terrible calm that comes after the storm. I sat in my worn wooden chair and looked at my hands. They weren't shaking. They were steady, ready for the next step. 2 days passed in almost complete silence. I received no more calls. Instead, my old cell phone began to vibrate with messages. The first was long, full of vague excuses about the market and bad business decisions. The second was shorter, almost an order, talking about family responsibility. The third was an emotional appeal, mentioning his mother's name, a stab he knew would hurt. I read each one without emotion, as if I were reading the technical specifications of a project. They were just data, information about my son's growing state of despair. I deleted them all, one by one. On the third day, Raquel arrived earlier than usual. Her eyes showed a concern she was trying to hide. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, handing me a mug of hot coffee. I knew she was asking much more than that. She was asking if the weight of my plan was crushing me. "I slept like a rock, my dear," I replied, and it was true. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. "He's coming here, isn't he?" she said quietly as she organized some tools on the workbench. I just nodded. It was inevitable. Lucas was never one to take no for an answer, especially when he was cornered. He always went for confrontation, believing that his presence and loud voice could bend the world to his will. The wait lasted until late afternoon. The sun was already beginning to paint the sky with shades of orange and purple, colors that rarely entered my workshop. Then I heard hurried footsteps outside, followed by a loud, impatient knock on the metal door. It wasn't the knock of someone asking, but of someone demanding. I opened the door slowly. Lucas was there, and the sight of him was a shock, even to me, who had been expecting it. He was wearing an expensive suit that looked a little wrinkled. His perfectly styled hair was now slightly messy, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The arrogance was still there, but it was fragile, like a thin layer of glass over panic. He entered uninvited, looking around the workshop with disgust. "What is this place? Is this where you've been living?" he asked, his voice full of contempt that couldn't hide his despair. "It's my place, the place you left me," I replied calmly, closing the door behind him. He turned to me, his face contorted. "Dad, let's cut the drama. I made some mistakes, okay? I need your help. It's a small amount for you, just enough to get me back on my feet. I'll pay you back everything, I swear." It was amazing how he still saw himself as the victim in this situation. He couldn't see the depth of what he had done. For him, it was just a matter of money, a cash flow problem. He didn't understand that he had stolen my life, not just my savings. I walked slowly to my workbench and picked up a small magnifying glass, used to see the smallest details of the gears. I looked at him through it, a symbolic gesture that only I understood. I was seeing every flaw, every crack in his facade. "Return what, Lucas?" I asked, my voice still low. "The time I lost? The trust I broke? The house where your mother and I built our memories? Some things are priceless and cannot be returned." He laughed. A dry, joyless sound. "Don't give me sentimentality now. You've always been an old dreamer, playing with your pieces. I'm talking about the real world where bills come in and people lose everything." He gestured with his hands, his voice rising in tone. "You have something saved up. I know you do. Every old man saves a little money for an emergency. This is the emergency." That's when I knew it was time. I carefully placed the magnifying glass back on the counter. "You're right, Lucas. I did have something saved up, something that took me 40 years to build." I went to a metal cabinet in the corner and opened it. Inside there was no money, but rather the prototype of my stabilizer, mounted on a velvet base. Next to it was a leather briefcase. I picked it up and placed it on the workbench. "You called my work old man's toys," I said, opening the briefcase. Inside was a copy of the patent sales contract. I turned it toward him. The name of the technology company was at the top, and just below it, the amount. A number with so many zeros that it took a moment to comprehend. Lucas looked at the document. His eyes widened, and the color drained from his face. He looked from the paper to me, and back to the paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He couldn't couldn't process it. The old man's toy he had so despised was worth more than anything he had ever had and lost. How? He finally managed to whisper, his voice hoarse. With patience, I replied. With hard work. With everything you always thought was a waste of time. He took a step back, bumping into a pile of boxes. The arrogant, hurried man was gone, replaced by a pale, shocked figure. He finally understood. He hadn't stolen from me when I was at rock bottom. He stole from me at the very moment I was about to reach the top. So, you have, he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Lucas, I do, but not for you, I said, my voice as firm as the steel of my tools. You taught me a valuable lesson, not to trust those who don't deserve it. Now I'll teach you mine. The value of something is not in its price, but in the dedication that went into it. You didn't value me or my work. Therefore, you have no right to anything that comes from it. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred, envy, and, for the first time, a hint of terrified understanding. He hadn't just lost a loan. He had lost an inheritance he didn't even know existed. He had traded a future of unimaginable wealth for a few years of cheap luxury. He said nothing more. He just turned and left, stumbling in his haste. I heard his footsteps receding until they disappeared in the noise of the city. I closed the door and, for the first time, felt the weight of it all lift from my shoulders. It wasn't joy. It was peace. A cold, hard peace, one with pain and patience. I looked at my workshop, my little kingdom. It wasn't a place of abandonment. It was the place where I had rebuilt my life, screw by screw. Raquel, who had watched everything in silence from a dark corner, approached. Is it over? She asked. I smiled at her, a tired but genuine smile. No, my dear, I said, picking up a tool. Now it's just begun. My words hung in the dusty air of the workshop, heavier than any piece of metal. Raquel looked at me, trying to understand what came after the storm. The beginning, for me, was not a new revenge, but the construction of a new life on the ruins of the old one. The cold justice I served Lucas was not the final destination. It was just clearing the ground. In the days that followed, a new kind of energy took hold of me. The energy no longer came from waiting for his downfall, but from planning my new beginning. I sat with Raquel and Victor, the lawyer, in my small workshop, which now looked like a command center. We discussed not how to hide the money, but how to use it in the right way. I don't want mansions or luxury cars, I told them. That's what destroyed my son. I want to build something that lasts, something that has real value. Raquel, with her practical intelligence, suggested creating a space for young artisans, a place where talents like hers could flourish without the pressure to turn art into cheap products. The idea lit a light inside me that I thought was gone forever. We spent weeks designing the project. It would be a modern building, but with the soul of an old workshop. It would have the best tools, the best materials, and most importantly, masters to teach the younger ones. We decided to call it the Helena Craft Center in honor of my late wife. She always believed in the power of hands to create beauty. Lucas had tarnished her memory with his greed. I would honor it with my creation. It was the perfect antithesis of everything my son represented. He took what was mine to spend. I would use what I had earned to build. As the plans progressed, news about Lucas continued to arrive. Auntie called me once, her voice full of concern. He had lost his apartment. The friends who surrounded him when he had money had vanished into thin air. She told me he had been seen working as a waiter in a downtown restaurant, his face bitter, serving people he would have once despised. I listened in silence, feeling neither joy nor pity. I felt only a huge distance, as if she were talking about a stranger. The son I loved had long since ceased to exist. The man who remained was merely the consequence of his own choices. I did not wish him suffering, but I would do nothing to alleviate it either. The lesson had to be complete, and life was the harshest teacher of all. One day, Raquel showed me an article in the local newspaper. It was about a man who caused a scandal at a luxury hotel, shouting that he was the son of a millionaire and demanding credit. The description matched Lucas. He was thrown out by security. Reading that was like seeing the last piece of a broken clock fall to the floor. His identity, built on the money he stole from me, had completely fallen apart. Without luxury to support him, he was nothing. He had no character, no skills, no patience to build something from scratch. He only knew how to take what was already there. And now, there was nothing left to take. I folded the newspaper and put it aside. My focus was on the future, on the building that was beginning to rise on the other side of town. 6 months later, the Helena Center was inaugurated. It was a beautiful place, full of light and the sound of tools working. Raquel was the director, her eyes shining with a pride that warmed my heart. I didn't take on any official position. I became just the old master who walked through the rooms, giving advice, helping a young man adjust a gear or polish a piece. I found a new family there, a community of creators who, like me, believed in the value of patient work. My fortune was no longer in the bank. It was in the hands of those young people in the future future they were building. It was a living legacy, breathing and growing every day. It was my true masterpiece. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench in front of the center, watching the apprentices leave at the end of the day, I saw him. Lucas was across the street, standing in the shadow of a building. He was thinner, his clothes worn. He wasn't looking at me, but at the building that bore his mother's name. He watched the young people leaving, laughing, carrying their projects with pride. I saw his face contort into an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was the emptiness of someone who understands, too late, the magnitude of what he has lost. He didn't just lose money. He lost the inheritance of a name, the legacy of a craft, the chance to be part of something real and lasting. He stood there for a long time, just staring. I didn't move. There was nothing to say. Our lives were now two worlds separated by a street and an abyss of choices. Finally, he turned and blended into the crowd, disappearing like a dry leaf carried away by the wind. I felt no triumph. I felt the end of pain, the end of anger, the end of revenge. The mechanism I had built with such precision had completed its cycle. Raquel sat down beside me, placing her hand on mine. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I looked at the building, at Helena's name engraved on the facade, and smiled. "Better than ever, my dear," I replied. "The clock has finally stopped ticking. Now we have all the time in the world to build." And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. A solid, real peace, built with my own hands. The following weeks passed with the smoothness of a well-oiled machine. The image of Lucas, faded and lost across the street, became a distant memory, like a bad dream that you forget when you wake up. The peace I felt that day was not fleeting. It settled in me, solid and quiet. I was no longer a man waiting for the moment of revenge. I was a man who had found his place in the world again. My routine was simple. In the morning, I would walk to the Helena Center. The path was the same, but my steps were lighter. The weight I had carried on my shoulders for so long had disappeared. When I arrived, the sound of tools was the first thing that greeted me. It was a good noise, a sound of creation, of things being made. Raquel managed everything with impressive competence, but she always found a moment to have coffee with me in the small kitchen. We talked about the students, about new projects, about the difficulties and small victories of everyday life. I didn't have a position, a title. I was just Glauco, the old master that young people sought out when a piece didn't fit, or when they needed advice on how to give a piece of wood the perfect finish. And that was enough for me. Seeing the sparkle in a young man or woman's eyes when they managed to assemble their first complex mechanism was a greater reward than any amount of money in the bank. What would you do in my place? Tell me in the comments how you would deal with the betrayal of someone you love. Share your perspective and let's talk. One day, Raquel called me into her office. She seemed excited, with a different sparkle in her eyes. On her desk was an old wooden box, one of many I had donated to the center when I emptied Helena's old storage room. I had kept her things for years, not daring to touch them. Donating them to the center seemed like the right destination for all of it. "Glauco, we found this at the bottom of Helena's box of old projects," she said, her voice full of expectation. She opened the box and took out a roll of papers yellowed by time. They were drawings, detailed projects, hand-drawn with the elegant and precise handwriting of my late wife. I unrolled the papers carefully. My heart beat a little faster. It was a project I hadn't seen in decades, an idea Helena had in her later years but never had the chance to start. It was an automaton, a mechanical figure of a bird, incredibly complex. Each feather was a separate piece. Each movement of the wings was controlled by a series of tiny gears and springs. The goal was to create a mechanical bird that not only flapped its wings but also sang a melody through a system of internal bellows and whistles. It was ambitious, it was brilliant, it was Helena's face. Next to Raquel was one of the most talented apprentices, a young man named Daniel. He looked at the drawings with almost religious admiration. "This is incredible," he whispered. "The math behind it, the precision, it's a work of art." At that moment, looking at Helena's drawings and Daniel's amazed face, I understood something. My masterpiece was not revenge against Lucas. That was just closing a door, ending a painful chapter. My true masterpiece was yet to be built, and it wouldn't be just mine. It would belong to all of us. I looked at Raquel. "We're going to build it," I said, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. "The Helena Center will bring her last dream to life." Raquel's smile lit up the entire room. Daniel could barely contain his joy. The news spread quickly throughout the center, and the Helena Bird Project, as we named it, became everyone's great mission. The following months were filled with a new kind of energy. The main workshop was dedicated to the project. The best students were selected to work on different parts of the automaton under my and Raquel's supervision. Daniel became my right-hand man. The boy had a natural talent talent, patience, and respect for the craft that reminded me of myself when I was young. He was in no hurry. He understood that the beauty of a mechanism lay not only in its functioning, but in the perfection of each small part that composed it. Often, as we worked side by side, adjusting a tiny gear or polishing a metal rod, I found myself thinking of Lucas. I saw in Daniel everything Lucas never was. The dedication, the humility to learn, the joy of creating something with his own hands. Lucas always wanted the end result, the luxury, the status that money could buy. He was never interested in the process, the hard work, the patience required to build something from scratch. He saw a watch and saw only an object of value. Daniel saw the hundreds of pieces inside it, the genius who designed them, and the skill that assembled them. The comparison no longer brought me pain. It only brought a sad clarity. Lucas hadn't just lost money or an inheritance. He had lost the ability to feel that joy, the satisfaction of looking at something and saying, I made this, with my effort, with my time, with my soul. The work on the bird brought us even closer together. We became one big family. We had lunch together, discussed the challenges of the project, celebrated each small step completed. I told stories about Helena, about how she thought, about her passion for creating beautiful and complex things. She was alive there, in those walls, in the sound of the tools, in the concentration of the young apprentices. Her legacy was not just a name on a facade. It was a spirit of creation that passed from my hands to the hands of that new generation. One night, I stayed late with Daniel, finishing the main mechanism of the bird's song. When we finally got it to emit its first note, clear and perfect, a pure sound filled the silence of the workshop. We looked at each other and smiled. It was not a smile of triumph, but of pure and simple joy. In that sound, I heard the future, a future that I was helping to build, piece by piece. The clock of vengeance had stopped, but a new, much more beautiful mechanism had begun to work, and its music was peace. Time at the Helena Center ran differently, measured not in hours but in progress. Each day, Helena's bird came more to life. A polished brass feather was fitted to the wing, a tiny bellows was adjusted on the mechanical chest, a new gear was tested to ensure the smooth movement of the head. The project became the beating heart of the place. The apprentices no longer saw it as a simple job, but as an honor. They were helping to fulfill the last dream of a great artisan. Daniel, in particular, devoted every free minute to the bird. He stayed late, studying the drawings, polishing pieces so small they looked like grains of sand. I saw in him not just an apprentice, but an heir, not to my money, but to my passion, my knowledge. This piece, however, was like the calm before a storm. Helena's bird, even before it was ready, began to attract attention. First, there was a small article in the neighborhood newspaper talking about the center and its unique project. Then, a famous blogger on technology and art discovered the story and wrote an article that spread across the internet. People were fascinated by the idea of such a complex automaton, built using traditional techniques. The name of the Helena Center began to be whispered in circles I never imagined reaching, and that's how he found us. His name was Victor. He arrived on a sunny afternoon, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place amid the dust of our workshop. He was not a craftsman, nor an admirer. He was a businessman, and his eyes calculated the value of everything they saw. He introduced himself to Raquel as an investor interested in innovative projects. She, suspicious, brought him to me. Victor praised our work, using words like amazing and visionary, but his gaze was fixed on the bird, which was in its final stages of assembly on the main workbench. Mr. Glauco, what you are doing here is impressive, he said with a smile that did not warm. I would like to purchase this piece. I am offering a generous sum that could finance the center for years. I wiped my hands on a cloth and looked at him. This bird is not for sale, Mr. Victor, I replied calmly. It has no price. It has a value, and that value is sentimental. It is the memory of my wife. Victor seemed surprised for a moment, as if he couldn't understand that something couldn't be bought. He insisted, increased his offer, talked about exhibiting it in international galleries. To him, it was an object, an asset. To me, it was Helena's soul taking shape. Raquel intervened and politely dismissed him, saying that our decision was final. He left, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time we would see him. Men like Victor don't take no for an answer. They see it as a challenge. A week later, he returned. This time, his proposal was bigger. He didn't just want the bird. He wanted the Helena Center. He wanted to turn it into a luxury brand, produce replicas of the bird to sell to wealthy collectors. He wanted to put his name on everything, erase Helena's, and turn it into a money-making machine. Raquel laughed in his face. You don't understand anything about this place, do you? She said. The refusal really angered him. The fake smile disappeared, and I saw the real man behind the mask, cold, impatient, and used to getting what he wants. He left promising that we would regret it. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unpleasant. The next attack was smarter. Victor no longer tried to buy us. He tried to dismantle us from within. He discovered that Daniel was the key piece of the project, the most talented apprentice. He approached him outside the center. He offered offered Daniel a job at his technology company, a very high salary, a state-of-the-art laboratory, the chance to lead his own projects. It was any young engineer's dream. Daniel told me everything that same night, his face full of conflict. Glauco, I would never leave the center, he said, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. But the offer, I could help my family, have a life I never imagined. I put my hand on his shoulder. Daniel, the talent you have is yours, I said. You should use it where your heart tells you is the right place. I'm not going to ask you to stay, nor to go. The decision is yours. But know that what we have built here is not just about money or technology. It's about soul. As this new battle unfolded, the ghost of my past decided to resurface. Lucas somehow learned of the center's fame and Victor's interest. Perhaps he read about it in the newspapers or heard some rumor. For him, the news must have sounded like an alarm. The old man he had abandoned had not only become a millionaire, but had also built something respected, something that bore his mother's name. The legacy he had despised was flourishing without him, and instead of feeling pride or remorse, he felt envy, the same envy that had guided him throughout his life. He saw Victor not as an enemy, but as an opportunity, a chance to ally himself with someone powerful and perhaps get a slice of what he thought was still rightfully his. Raquel told me, her face pale with anger. One of the apprentices saw Lucas waiting near Victor's office in the city center. He looked nervous, poorly dressed, a desperate man. Days later, Raquel found out through a contact that Lucas had secured a meeting. He offered his services to Victor. He said he knew my way of thinking, my weaknesses. He promised to help Victor gain control of the center in exchange for a position, money, any crumbs that man was willing to throw his way. The news hit me like a punch in the stomach, but the pain was different this time. It wasn't the pain of a father's betrayal. It was the sadness of confirming that the man my son had become was beyond redemption. He was willing to sell the memory of his own mother to the first stranger who offered him power. The circle of his greed was closing in a pathetic way. The war for the Helena Center would not only be against an ambitious stranger, it would once again be against my own flesh and blood. The anger I felt when Raquel told me about Lucas was different. It didn't burn like the first betrayal. It was a coldness that settled in my bones, a chilling certainty that the door to my son was finally locked and rusted shut forever. He wasn't just allying himself with an enemy. He was trying to sell the last pages of his mother's story, a book he never bothered to read. His greed knew no bounds. It was a dark pit, and he kept digging, happy in the darkness. That night, I couldn't work. I sat in my old chair looking at Helena's drawings, and for the first time in a long time, I talked to her in silence. I apologized. I apologized for our son becoming a man we didn't recognize. The tension at the Helena Center was palpable in the days that followed. Everyone knew about Victor's proposal to Daniel, and the other apprentices' looks were a mixture of curiosity and fear. They saw Daniel as the future of that place, and the idea of losing him to a shark like Victor was frightening. Daniel was quiet for 2 days. He worked with the same precision as always, but his face was closed, his thoughts distant. I didn't pressure him. The choice was his, and any words from me could weigh unfairly. On the morning of the 3rd day, he came to me. His eyes were tired but clear. Glauco, he began, his voice firm. I thanked Mr. Victor for the offer and said no. A wave of relief washed over me, but I let him continue. What he offered me was a lab, a salary. What we have here is different. We are building a metal soul. That is priceless. My place is here. At that moment, I saw not just an apprentice. I saw a successor, a son of the trade, truer than my own flesh and blood. Daniel's refusal was the last straw for Victor. If he couldn't buy our loyalty, he would try to destroy our foundation. A week later, we received an official notification. It was a legal document, full of complicated words, but the message was simple. Victor was contesting ownership of the building. He claimed that the transfer of ownership to the foundation we had created was irregular. It was a blatant lie, a tactic to drown us in legal costs and bureaucracy, to wear us down until we gave up. Raquel turned pale as she read the document. Glauco, a legal battle like this could take years, and it costs a fortune we don't have, she said, her voice full of despair. I took the paper from her hand and crumpled it up. He thinks we're weak, Raquel. He thinks we're poor, scared artisans. I looked into her eyes and said calmly, he's very wrong. We're going to fight, and we can afford it. It was the first time I gave her a clue about my new financial situation. The surprise on her face was immense, but it soon turned into a battle smile. War had been officially declared. While we hired a good lawyer, a man named Alberto, to handle Victor's attack, Lucas made his move. He showed up at the workshop door on a rainy afternoon. He looked thinner, older. The expensive clothes he used to wear were wrinkled, as if he had slept in them. He didn't look me in the eye. Dad, he began, but the words sounded strange, empty. I heard about the problems with the building, with this Victor guy. I can help. I can talk to him, negotiate. I know people. I interrupted him without raising my voice. You don't know people, Lucas. You know one man. The same man you tried to ally yourself with to destroy your mother's legacy. He recoiled as if I had slapped him in the face. It wasn't like that. I just wanted, he stammered, trying to find an excuse. You wanted your share. I finished the sentence for him. You always want your share, no matter what, no matter the cost. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite him in, but so he could see inside the workshop. Helena's bird was on the central workbench, almost finished. The apprentice apprentices worked around it, focused, silent. It was a scene of creation, of community, of respect. Look closely, Lucas. Do you see this? This is called value. It's something you never understood. You confuse value with price. Your mother understood. Daniel understands. Even the youngest apprentice here understands. You're the only one who's left out. The truth hit him. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw not greed in his eyes, but a terrible emptiness. The realization that he had lost something much greater than money. I have nothing for you, Lucas. No anger, no forgiveness. Just nothing. Now please, go away. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked into the rain, a stranger walking away from the only family he might still have. His departure was the final straw. The sadness was there, but it didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, it gave me a new focus. The fight with Victor became secondary, a problem to be solved by lawyers with the money I now had. The real battle had already been won there, inside me. The ultimate goal was no longer revenge, but creation. We spent the following weeks finishing the bird. Each feather was adjusted, each gear lubricated. The work brought us together in an even deeper way. We were a fortress of artisans, defending not a building, but an idea. The idea that some things are not for sale. On the eve of the center's inauguration, with Victor's lawsuit already losing steam thanks to our robust defense, we gathered in the workshop. Everything was ready. Helena's bird rested on its pedestal, a work of art born of love and pain. Daniel looked at me, nodding. With a gentle movement, I turned the small key at its base. The mechanism came to life. The metal wings rose, the head turned, and then the sound. A clear, pure, and complex melody filled the air. It was not the sound of revenge. It was Helena's lullaby, the same one she sang to Lucas when he was a baby. It was the music of peace, finally found. The inauguration of the Helena Center was scheduled for a sunny Saturday. The air in the workshop, normally heavy with the smell of oil and metal, was different. There was the scent of flowers that Raquel had arranged in simple vases and the smell of fresh paint on the newly painted walls. Our apprentices, dressed in their best clothes, welcomed the guests with a pride that warmed my heart. They were journalists, artists, engineers, and people from the neighborhood, all curious to see what we had built in that forgotten place. Helena's bird stood in the center of the main hall, covered with a dark velvet cloth, waiting for its moment. I watched everything from a corner, feeling a peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't the peace of victory over my enemies, but the peace of a builder who sees his work completed and knows it is good. Raquel approached, adjusting the collar of my shirt. "Are you okay, Glauco?" she asked, with a worried smile. I nodded. "Better than I've been in years," I replied, and it was the absolute truth. The melody of the bird, which only my apprentices and I knew, seemed to play silently within me. The ceremony began. Raquel gave a beautiful speech about the importance of manual art in a digital world, about creating with your hands and your soul. Daniel spoke about the future, about the projects the center would develop for young talents. With each word they spoke, I felt Helena's legacy solidify, transforming into something real, much greater than a metal automaton, however perfect it might be. When it was my turn to speak, I walked slowly to the small stage. My eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment fear struck me. What if Victor showed up? What if Lucas was there? Hidden in the crowd, I forced the thought away. This moment was ours. I spoke about Helena, about her love for small details, about how she saw beauty in gears and screws. I talked about how pain can be transformed into creation, and then with Daniel's help, I pulled the cloth covering the bird. A collective gasp filled the room. It was magnificent, its polished metal feathers glistening under the lights. The crowd moved closer to get a better look, amazed. It was at that exact moment that Victor arrived. He did not enter discreetly. He opened the door forcefully, causing everyone to turn around. He was accompanied by two men in suits who looked like security guards. His face was a mask of controlled fury. "What a beautiful party, Glauco," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Celebrating on property that doesn't belong to you. Our case is still in court, in case you've forgotten." The silence that followed was heavy. Raquel took a step forward, ready to intervene, but I raised my hand to stop her. I walked over to Victor, stopping a few feet away from him. "You're wrong, Mr. Victor," I said calmly. "I'm celebrating in a place that belongs to my wife's memory and to the future of these young people. You have no power here. Money can't buy everything." He laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "We'll see who laughs last when the judge orders the eviction. You and your toys will be out on the street." Before he could say anything else, our lawyer, Alberto, who was among the guests, intervened. "Mr. Victor, your presence here is an attempt at intimidation. I advise you to leave before I call the police for disturbance," Alberto said with a professional firmness that disarmed Victor. Seeing that he would not get what he wanted, he turned his back and left, promising with his eyes that the war was not over. The tension took a while to dissipate, but little by little the conversations resumed. I decided it was time. I turned the key at the base of the bird. Helena's melody filled the hall. The sound was so pure, so unexpectedly beautiful, that people fell silent to listen. Tears welled up in my eyes when I saw their reaction. It was proof that the soul we had put into that creation could be felt by everyone. As the music played, I noticed a strange movement near the back door, which led to my old workshop. It was a shadow, a figure that moved too quickly. A chill ran down my spine. Discreetly, I signaled to Daniel and we went to check it out. The door was ajar. We entered the small room and what we saw broke my heart in a new and definitive way. Lucas was there. He wasn't trying to steal anything of value. In his hands, he held a sledgehammer. His face was contorted with envy and despair. He looked at my workbench, at the projects, at the tools, and his plan was clear. If he couldn't have what I had built, he would destroy the place where it all began. "Lucas," I called, and my voice came out as a whisper. He turned, startled. The sledgehammer fell from his hands with a metallic clang on the cement floor. His eyes were empty, lost. He didn't look like a villain, just a broken man, consumed by his own bitterness. I didn't, he tried to say, but there were no words that could justify it. Daniel moved to restrain him, but I stopped him. This was a moment between father and son, the last one. "Did you come to destroy the tools?" I asked, without anger, just with immense sadness. "Those tools built your first bike. They built the toys you loved. They paid for your food, for your education, and you wanted to destroy them?" He started to cry, an ugly cry like a spoiled child who lost the game. There was no regret there, just self-pity. At that moment, I understood the whole truth. My revenge was not to see Lucas crawling back for money. That would be too easy. True justice, the true end was this. It was me seeing him for what he was, a hollow man, incapable of creating, only of consuming and destroying. And worst of all, he was also beginning to see himself in the same way. The emptiness in his eyes was the mirror of his soul. "Go away, Lucas," I said, my voice firm. "Go away and never come back. There is nothing left for you here. Not my hatred, not my money, not my pity." He looked at me one last time, as if searching for something that no longer existed. Then he turned and ran out the back door, disappearing into the afternoon. I didn't call the police. His punishment would be to live the rest of his life with the echo of his own choices. I returned to the party, to Helena's melody, to my new family. Revenge was complete, not with a bang, but with the silence of the door closing forever. When the last guest left, the workshop fell silent, except for the soft hum of Helena's bird, which we had left on. The melody filled the space with a peace that seemed to wash over the walls, cleaning away the marks left by Victor's visit and Lucas's ghost. Raquel was collecting some glasses, her face tired but lit up with a smile. Daniel stood beside me looking at the bird with the admiration of a creator. "It was quite a day, Glauco," he said, his voice low. I nodded. "It was the day this place was truly born," I replied. I looked at the two of them, my new family forged in the fire of betrayal and creativity, Raquel with her quiet strength and Daniel with his brilliant talent. At that moment, I knew that the Helena Center was safe, not because of its walls or my money, but because of the people who inhabited it. The past was finally where it should be, behind me. Revenge, I realized, was not a destination, but a journey that had led me there, to that exact moment of peace. Weeks passed. Life at the center found a rhythm. Mornings were filled with the sound of tools, afternoons with theoretical classes, and evenings with the smell of coffee as projects took shape. The legal battle with Victor dragged on behind the scenes, a background noise that Raquel and Alberto handled competently. One day, Alberto called us to a meeting. He spread documents across the table. "Victor is playing dirty as expected," he said, adjusting his glasses. "He's using every trick in the book to delay the process. Every postponement costs money. His strategy is to wear us down, to exhaust us financially." Raquel looked at me, worried. I just took a sip of my tea. "Tell me what you need, Alberto. Money is not the problem," I said calmly. The lawyer's expression changed from concern to renewed confidence. He didn't know where my confidence came from, but he understood that we weren't bluffing. We left the meeting with a counterattack plan, ready to fight as long as necessary. Victor thought he was fighting an old craftsman. He didn't know he was fighting against a lifetime of patience. The center flourished. News of the inauguration and the beauty of Helena's bird spread throughout the city. We received dozens of applications from young people who wanted to learn a craft, who were tired of screens and wanted to create something with their own hands. Among them, a young woman named Beatrice stood out. She had a natural talent for fine mechanics, a sensitivity in her fingers that reminded me of myself when I was young. Seeing her working alongside Daniel, both absorbed in a new mechanism, filled my heart with a joy I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. Helena's legacy was not only preserved, it was growing, multiplying through those young, eager hands. I spent most of my time observing, guiding when necessary, but mostly trusting. The workshop was no longer just mine. It was theirs. It was a living organism, pulsing with new ideas and dreams. Victor, realizing that his war of attrition in the courts was not working, changed tactics. The next attack came from where we least expected it. An article appeared on a local news blog, full of poisonous insinuations. The text questioned the origin of my sudden enrichment. It suggested that the Helena Center was a front for some illegal activity. It painted me as a mysterious and dubious figure who appeared out of nowhere to take possession of a valuable property. There was no evidence, just malicious questions and catchphrases. But the damage was done. The poison of mistrust had been released into the air. Raquel was furious when she read it. "That's just like him, attacking from behind, smearing our name because he can't beat us head on," she said, her face red with anger. I, however, felt something different, a cold calm. Victor was desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. The next morning, I gathered everyone in the main hall. The apprentices were quiet, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and loyalty. I read the article aloud, without skipping any of the accusations. When I finished, there was complete silence. "They want to make us ashamed of what we've built here," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "They want us to hide, but we're not going to do that." I looked at Raquel and Daniel, who nodded, already understanding my plan. "We're going to do the opposite. Next Saturday, we'll open our doors. We'll have an open workshop day. We'll invite the whole neighborhood, the press, anyone who wants to come. We'll show them exactly what we do. Our response will not be with words, but with work. The truth is the best tool we have." Saturday arrived, a clear and sunny day. We set up tables outside, displaying the apprentices' projects. Helena's bird was on its pedestal, singing its melody to everyone who passed by. The community's response was incredible. Whole families came, children with eyes wide with wonder, elderly people who remembered workshops like mine. Journalists from major outlets, drawn by the controversy, arrived skeptical but left amazed, interviewing Daniel and Beatrice about their creations. They saw the passion, the honesty, the beauty of handcrafted work. There was nothing to hide. At the end of the afternoon, I was sitting on a bench watching the scene. Raquel sat down next to me, handing me a glass of water. "I think Victor's shot backfired," she said, smiling. I looked at the crowd, at the young people proudly explaining their mechanisms. The revenge I had planned against Lucas seemed like something from another life. It was small, bitter. What I had now was much greater. It was a victory built not on someone's ruin, but on the foundation of love, art, and community. And that was a fortress that no Victor or Lucas in the world could ever tear down. My story is about rebuilding and resilience, not just revenge. Be inspired by my journey and use pain to become stronger. Leave a like if you believe in overcoming adversity.